Hello and welcome to Pitboards and Podiums with me, Maya Westwick. In today's episode, we are going to be doing the recap of the 2024 Monaco Grand Prix. So buckle up and let's talk F1. Okay guys, so let's get into a historic weekend in Formula One. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of the practice sessions as well, because obviously Monaco is not your typical Grand Prix weekend. A lot of the build-up to the race can be very, very important. So I am going to do a little bit on the practice sessions and probably a lot about qualifying and then not so much about the race itself. Because to be honest, other than lap 1, the race was pretty uneventful. It's Monaco. What do you expect? So, free practice 1. Pierre Gasly had very little running in FP1 because he had problems with his engine. We got a red flag in FP1. That was due to Zhou brushing the wall and damaging his front wing. He lost his front wing end plate, and then Leclerc got floor damage from running over the debris. Not a good start to his home weekend. During FP1, Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari all looked incredibly fast and very competitive. And in typical Mercedes fashion, that kind of faded as the weekend went on. But in the practice sessions, they were looking fab. We had a pit lane incident where the Haas of Kevin Magnussen was released into the path of Yuki Tsunoda. Wasn't a big deal, but Yuki kind of had to slam his brakes on a little bit. Perez got a rear left puncture and broke the rim of the wheel as well, and that was after a brush with the wall. Verstappen was complaining massively about the car setup, and it just seemed that Red Bull did not have a good weekend this weekend, and that is quite exciting because this is not the first weekend this year that Red Bull has had some serious competition, and this weekend Red Bull were nowhere near the top. In terms of the car and the drivability, they weren't there. Which is very exciting for the rest of this season, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit because it seems like we do have potentially a championship battle on our hands once again. How exciting! During FP1 as well, Logan Sargent was annoyed by traffic. There was also an incident where Leclerc didn't see him coming out of the tunnel because of the light difference and then slid through the Nouvelle Chicane after seeing him. Because obviously the difference in light, the Williams is quite a dark car anyway. So once you're out of the dark and your eyes are adjusted to the light, like Leclerc was, looking behind you in your mirrors, you're not going to see the dark Williams of Logan Sargent still in the dark of the tunnel until it's too late and you can't get out of the way, and then yeah, it was just a bit of a problem for Sargent, that was. And FP1 was topped by Sir Lewis Hamilton with a time of 1 minute and 12.169 seconds. Piastri was in P2, Russell P3, Norris P4, all of them on soft tyres, and then Leclerc was in P5 on medium tyres. Then comparably, the Red Bulls of Verstappen and Perez were all the way down in P11 and 12. Obviously, it is only practice. It's not the end of the world, but that was kind of indicative of the weekend that they were about to have and how much work they were going to have to do. They were also on the medium tyres, not the softs, but still, they had a troublesome weekend. During FP2, there was an incident between Magnussen and Albon that was noted for impeding at 10.19 at the last corner of Antonio Nogues. That was deemed no further action, nothing else came from that, but it was noted by the stewards. Multiple drivers were suffering with bouncing. Obviously, with it being a street circuit, it is inherently more bouncy anyway. But Russell and Verstappen were both on their team radios talking about how painful it was, and it was hard to drive, hard to see where they were going. Tsunoda was noted for impeding Verstappen. Nothing came from it. It was only a practice session. And the session was topped by Charles Leclerc with a time of 1 minute and 11.278 seconds, with Hamilton in P2 and Alonso in P3. During FP3, Valtteri Bottas, 13 minutes in, caused a red flag after clipping the wall at the exit of the Twimmenpool chicane, which broke his right front suspension and caused him to then have to stop at La Rascasse. The red flag only lasted 4 minutes, but of course he was not able to set a time in FP3 after that. Magnussen had an incident of impeding noted in the tunnel. This was basically, he did not do the impeding. I know that I've already mentioned his name quite a few times, and I'm going to say it a few more times, but I will stick up for this man. I don't know how, but I will. So this incident he didn't do anything wrong. He was on a fast lap going into the tunnel, and it was just a problem all weekend. A lot of drivers were going slowly in the tunnel, which is not a very responsible thing to do. And it happened in the junior series as well. There was a moment during Formula 2 that was a very, very near miss that could have been absolutely catastrophic. And basically, Hülkenberg and Tsunoda were the 2 cars ahead of him, and they were both going quite slowly. And as he's going full speed through the tunnel, he nearly goes straight into the back of them because they're just in his way. Obviously, the tunnel, you're going from light to dark and then dark to light when you exit it. But through the tunnel, it's a bend. Don't go slow in the tunnel because you don't know. And also, in Monaco, the radio communications can be troublesome for the teams. The GPS is troublesome for the teams. So warning your driver that there's someone ahead of them going slowly is so difficult to do. Warning your driver in the tunnel that there's someone faster behind them is so difficult to do. So just don't go slow in there. Just go normal speed through the tunnel and then slow down. But anyway, speaking of the Haas cars though, they were very, very speedy, and it kind of looked like they were going to have a very good weekend until a bit later on, and I'll get to that. But there was also some traffic issues in FP3, of course. If all 20 cars are on track, there are going to be traffic issues. Verstappen was getting very angry. Hamilton had a big lock-up into Sainte Devote, ruined that set of tyres. Lots and lots of drivers were struggling with turning into Sainte Devote, lots of lock-ups and bailouts. So a couple of other drivers probably also ruined the set of tyres that they did it on. And with 9 minutes to go, we had Leclerc in P1, 0.6 seconds ahead of Sainz in P2. He was finding time around his hometown that no one else was finding. It's almost like he grew up on those streets. Sarcasm. Lando Norris had a moment in FP3 of George Russell impeding him, and on his team radio he swore. He said, "Effing idiots, these blokes, all of them. Not all of them, just some of them." And he was referring to George Russell. Basically, at the Nouvelle Chicane, it was under investigation afterwards as well. Nothing came from it. At the Nouvelle Chicane, after the exit of the tunnel, Russell slowed massively, nearly caused an accident. Lando Norris then received, which I don't agree with necessarily, but also I understand why they've done it. George Russell didn't get anything for it, but Lando Norris received his second reprimand of the season for deliberately moving towards Russell to express his displeasure. Bit dramatic, but hey, if he admitted to doing that, they're going to give him a reprimand for it, so it is what it is. As I've already said, Leclerc was 0.6 ahead of everybody else with 9 minutes to go of the session, and then from P2 down to P9 was 0.2 apart, and this is still the case with 5 minutes to go, so nobody is managing to find this time that Leclerc has found. Verstappen does a flying lap around that looks really, really fast. It's still 0.2 down on Leclerc, and he also says on his team radio after that, because of how much he's struggling, he says on his team radio that if he does more laps like that, he'll end up in the fence. He's basically saying this car has not got the grip, this car is on a knife's edge the entire time, and not in a good way. If I keep doing laps like this, I'm not going to keep control of the car and I will end up crashed. Also in the tunnel, Verstappen and Tsunoda, there was an incident that was noted, and Verstappen received a warning from the stewards where in the tunnel, Verstappen was going very slowly. He was noted for driving unnecessarily slowly, and Tsunoda was on a fast lap. He was forced off the racing line and nearly went into the wall trying to get past. FP3 was topped by Charles Leclerc with a time of 1 minute 11.369 seconds, with Verstappen in P2 and Hamilton in P3. Now on to qualifying, which arguably is the most important part of the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. So, Q1, let's get into it. Q1 with all 20 cars. As you can expect, there was a lot of traffic. There were huge queues in the pit lane waiting to get out and get track position, because anybody crashes in Monaco, it can ruin 15 other drivers' qualifying times. There was a massive queue. The only people not in that queue were Sauber, Ferrari and Haas. They were the last 3 teams to go out. Lewis Hamilton set the first time of the session, which was 1 minute 12.954 second lap. Then we had Hülkenberg and Magnussen finishing their laps about half a second faster than that on their first attempts. Norris's first attempt was slower than the Haas first attempt, which is just showing you how speedy Haas were looking. Albon and Sainz were noted for impeding, which was going to be looked at after the session. Albon basically slowed down to let Sainz pass at Massenet, and that's what everyone thought it was. But then it turns out that actually it was Sainz impeding Albon at the swimming pool chicane. So there was a little bit of confusion there with the broadcast. Zhou, Bottas and Ricciardo were all noted for impeding at Massenet. That was not looked at by the steward, so that was just noted by race control. Leclerc on his team radio, obviously when he went out a little bit later on, he was out of sequence with everyone else, which with the traffic in Monaco can be a massive problem. And he just said on his team radio, this is the worst position, we're completely out of sequence, because they just left him in the garage at the start when everyone else was trying to get out and get a lap done. With 5 minutes of the session to go, Hamilton goes up to P2 from around P13. Perez is still in the pits and he's down in P15, and Leclerc is starting another lap attempt from P13. So at this point, you can see that the track has kind of ramped up a bit, and that the first lap attempts that these drivers have done are not necessarily going to get them through to Q2. Perez leaves the pits and is on an outlap with less than 4 minutes to go. He is at this point in P16. So at this point, if he does not set a faster lap, he's out in Q1 in Monaco. Disastrous. He sets his lap and he's only P14, half a second down on Russell's pace in P1, because Russell is in P1 at this point. With 2.5 minutes of the session to go, Norris is down in P16 and he's in the pits. Why is he in the pits, I hear you ask? Because there was a bit of a problem throughout the weekend until the race with the advertising that was put onto the barriers around the track in Monaco coming off and getting stuck under the cars, and Lando Norris had a 4 metre long piece of advertising stuck under his car. As you can probably guess, that would massively affect the aero. So he had to go into the pits and get that removed from his car so he could go out and set another lap time. He did his outlap with 2 minutes to go, and he went from P17, managed to set a lap that was good enough for P10 at that point, which of course got him through to Q2. Russell was in P1, as I've already mentioned, with a time of 1 minute 11.492 seconds, with Hamilton in P2 and Leclerc in P3 with 2 minutes to go. And there was a huge traffic jam at the final corner around the Rascas and the two Anthony Nose corners. All 20 cars were on track with 20 seconds to go. It just doesn't really work around Monaco. Leclerc managed to set a time that was good enough for P5 during Q1, and he was behind Carlos Sainz. And the 5 drivers out in Q1, there's a couple of shocks in here. In P16, Fernando Alonso. P17, Logan Sargent. P18, Sergio Perez. P19, Valtteri Bottas. And P20, Zhou Guanyu. Ocon set the cut-off time. He was in P15, which was a 1 minute 11.887 second time. And Alonso was at 0.132 seconds off. Sargent was at 0.133 seconds off. Perez was 0.173 seconds off. Bottas was 0.625 seconds off. And Zhou was over a second off. Some shock positions though. Albon, all the way up in P6 at this point. Verstappen down in P7. And both Haas cars managed to get through to Q2. So as you can kind of tell with that, not your typical qualifying session. On to Q2. So Q2 was topped by Lando Norris. He set a time of 1 minute 10.732 seconds, and we had Verstappen in P2, Piastri in P3. Piastri and the two Mercedes cars both went out on used tyres for their first attempts in Q2. Lando Norris's first attempt was a 1 minute 11.372 second lap, and Verstappen's first attempt was a 1 minute 11.196. So it seemed at this point that Verstappen had found a bit of pace again. Hülkenberg had a big snap at Sander Vogt and hit his rear left to the barrier. He was very lucky to kind of get away from that relatively unscathed, without, any punctures or damage. Ocon was complaining on his team radio about being blocked by Hülkenberg, and there was an incident between the two of them noted for impeding, which was investigated after the session, and there was no further action from that. Sainz set a 1 minute 11.177 on used tyres. Verstappen then set a 1 minute 11.019, so he's improved on his time. And with 6 minutes to go, from P7 to P10, we had Norris, Piastri, Hamilton and Russell. So both of the McLarens and both of the Mercedes were down in the kind of danger zone, and we had Stroll, Albon, Magnussen, Hülkenberg and Ricciardo as the bottom 5. Hamilton then went on to set a 1 minute 11.110, which took him up to P3 from P9. Piastri sets a 1 minute 10.756 despite hitting the wall. Norris then sets his time that topped the session, which was a 1 minute 10.732, as I've said. That was with a green sector 1 and 2 and a purple sector 3, and that was from P10. He went up to P1. 0.024 seconds ahead of Piastri in P2. And with 2 minutes to go, we had Ocon in P10 with a time of 1 minute 11.285, with Gasly, Stroll, Magnussen, Hülkenberg and Ricciardo in the bottom 5, but only Norris and Piastri were believed to be safe, so they both were in the pits or going back to the pits and not going out again to not waste any tyres. Hamilton, despite a big lockup at the Nouvelle Chicane, improved to 6th fastest, and Gasly then goes 5th fastest with a 1 minute 10.896, which pushes his teammate Ocon down into P11, which is the first time that an Alpine has got through to Q3 in 2024, so he was very, very happy on his team radio. Albon was in P10 with a time of 1 minute 11.216, which is of course now the cutoff, and Leclerc P4 signed P8, so a bit of a distance between the Ferrari drivers. The 5 drivers out in Q2. We had Esteban Ocon qualifying in P11, 0.069 seconds from Gasly's time, Hülkenberg P12, 0.224 seconds off, Ricciardo 0.226 seconds off in P13, saying that he really struggled to get the tyres going, Lance Stroll in P14, 0.347 seconds off, and Magnussen in P15, 0.509 seconds off. And then in Q3 was topped by Charles Leclerc, the hometown hero, with a time of 1 minute 10.270 seconds. So that was the pole time for the Monaco Grand Prix. But let me tell you what happened in the session to get Charles there. So Sainz was the first driver in the queue going out in the pit lane on fresh tyres. He was determined that he was going to get a lap in because the last few Monaco Grand Prix, there has been a red flag in Q3. This year there was not. Nice little surprise for us. But in recent history, it has happened. So they know that there's a massive risk of that. Albon was kind of forced into a strategy because to get through to Q3 in the first place, he'd kind of used a lot of his tyres. So he only had one fresh set that he could use at the end if he was going to go out and do the standard 1 lap attempt and then another lap attempt. So he kind of went out at completely different time to everyone else, completely out of sequence. He went out for his first attempt with about 5 minutes to go and just kind of used the quiet time on track, and when he set his lap he was the only driver on track. Hamilton's first attempt was a 1 minute 10.975. Leclerc set a 1 minute 10.418 while complaining that there was something moving on the pedals. Piastri almost matches Leclerc with a 1 minute 10.444. Norris then sets a 1 minute 10.940, so he's half a second back from Leclerc and Piastri. I believe that was on used tyres, but I could be wrong there. Verstappen was massively losing time in the final sector, so even when he set a purple sector 1, his lap time was still 0.149 seconds off of Leclerc's first attempt, and that put him into P3 with his first attempt. As I said, Albon went on track with no other cars on track, so he was the only one doing his lap with 5 minutes to go, and his time was 1 minute 10.948, which at that time was good enough for P7. Then with 4 minutes to go, Sainz, Verstappen, Hamilton, Russell and Gasly all go out. Leclerc goes out about 25 seconds later, so he again is a little bit offset to the others. Piastri then goes out with 3 minutes to go. Norris goes out with about 2 minutes and 40 seconds left, so they're starting to pace things out a little bit, and Norris was the final driver out for a final lap attempt. Sainz consistently was doing 2 prep laps throughout qualifying and then a flying lap, rather than just the 1 out lap and then going straight into a flying lap. So even though he was one of the first drivers out for the second lap attempt, he didn't actually do his second lap attempt until behind the drivers that had come out behind him, if that makes sense. Hamilton's final lap attempt was a 1 minute 10.621, which was good enough for P4 at that time. Russell's final lap attempt was a 1 minute 10.543, which was good enough for P3 at that time, which pushed Hamilton down to P5, and that had a purple sector 1. Leclerc's lap attempt was his pole time of a 1 minute 10.270, which obviously put him up to P1. Verstappen abandoned his lap after he hit the wall. He was complaining about how slippery the car was all weekend, really, but he was complaining about it during qualifying. The back end slid into Sandevot and he hit the left side of the car onto the barrier, so he abandoned his lap and qualified in P6. Piastri set a time of 1 minute 10.424, which was good enough for P2. Sainz set a 1 minute 10.518, which was good enough for P3, and Norris a 1 minute 10.542, which was good enough for P4. Gasly crossed the line in P10. He almost hit the wall after going very, very deep into the final corner of Anthony Noakes. And Norris did claim on his team radio that he was impeded by Sainz, but that was never looked at by the stewards or anything like that, so there was no penalties for that. So the qualifying order was Charles Leclerc on pole, then Piastri 0.154 seconds behind, Sainz P3, Norris P4, Russell P5, Verstappen P6, Hamilton P7, Tsunoda P8, Albon P9 and Pierre Gasly in P10. Now on to the race. I'm going to give you a little spoiler here. For the first time in Formula 1 history, the finishing order of the top 10 drivers was the same as the qualifying order. So the order I've just told you for qualifying for the top 10 is where they finished in the race. So there's a little spoiler. Charles Leclerc won the Monaco Grand Prix. Gorgeous. I'll talk about it in more depth. But yeah, the race itself was a little bit of a procession, I can't lie to you. Nobody started the race on the soft tyres. And then going through the order of the grid, we had Leclerc, Piastri, Sainz and Norris on mediums, Russell, Verstappen and Hamilton on hards, Tsunoda and Albon on mediums, Gasly and Ocon on hards, Ricciardo on mediums, Stroll, Alonso, Sargent, Perez and Bottas on hards, Zhou and Hülkenberg on mediums and Magnussen on hards. Now you might be thinking, why are Hülkenberg and Magnussen down the bottom? They didn't qualify there. They got disqualified from qualifying. Basically afterwards, during the checks, their rear wing, the DRS, when they checked that the adjustable elements on either side, at the right and the left, were exceeding the allowed 0.85mm gap, which meant that their cars were not technically legal for qualifying, which meant they were disqualified from qualifying for a technical infringement, and they were allowed to start the race by the stewards, but they have to start at the back of the grid. Initially it was reported they were going to start from the pit lane, but they didn't. They started P19 and P20. They'd had a very good weekend up to that point, and that was kind of the start of everything going wrong for them, because it meant they were down in the back, which led to what happened on lap 1, which I'm about to tell you. So, lap 1, first lap of the race, the field was very tight at the back. Leclerc was leading, he maintained his lead, secured it, he's going through Casino Square, all seems well. This is where we start to see what's going on. So, Sainz had damage and locked up. He went off into the runoff with either a puncture or some sort of suspension damage, which now I believe was just a puncture, which was bad for Leclerc, because that meant that it was now 2 McLarens against him, we thought. Basically what happened with Sainz was that he'd made contact with Piastri's front left into Sandivot, which then pushed him into the wall and damaged his car. So we thought at this point, Sainz is out of the race at turn 4. How bad for Ferrari? How disappointing. No. As this is happening, we get a red flag. We think, oh wow, they're red flagging for Carlos Sainz. He must be in a really difficult place. There must be debris. It must be in a difficult place to recover the car. No. Going up Beau Rivage, turn 2, there was a huge incident between Perez, Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg. A huge incident. So basically, as they're going up, as they exit Sandivot, Hülkenberg, who was of course ahead of Magnussen, didn't get a very good exit of Sandivot. Magnussen had a relatively good start. Perez had quite a bad start, so he was all the way back down there. The only driver that is behind any of them at this point is Zhou Guanyu. Magnussen sees an opportunity to pass Perez. He's already got past Hülkenberg, like his car is already a car length ahead of Hülkenberg, and he sees that if he goes to the right of Perez, there is space for his car and he can get ahead of Perez. So he sticks his car up the outside of Perez, and as he does that, Perez looks in his mirror, sees that Magnussen is there, carries on moving that way anyway. One of those, which then pushes Magnussen into the wall. And obviously the other side of the wall is the harbour. It's not really anywhere for them to go. It's Monaco, it's very tight. And realistically, Magnussen could have bailed out of that move earlier on. Perez could have not done that. Perez could have left him more space. Neither of those things happened. So Magnussen, as he's being squeezed into the wall, scrapes the wall, tags Perez. Perez spins 90 degrees clockwise into the barrier, carries on out of control, being pushed sideways up Beau Rivage by Magnussen, who's also out of control. Hülkenberg then gets tagged by this uncontrollable wreck that is going on as he's trying to get past it, spins him round 180 degrees, and then it ends up with Perez. His car is reduced to just the survival cell. it's unrecognisable as a Formula 1 car pretty much. And Magnussen and Hulkenberg are like facing each other, and at one point Magnussen's car goes under Hulkenberg and then it slides back off. It's very dramatic. It was deemed a racing incident. There was no penalties given for that because you couldn't solely attribute the blame to anyone. A lot of people argued that it was Kevin Magnussen's fault, but to be quite honest, I don't think that if it had been anyone else, they would have been so quick to say it was his fault. I think because of recent form and recent penalty decisions, I think people automatically assume that if Kevin Magnussen's involved in an incident, he is solely to blame for it. And with it being lap 1, it was just deemed a racing incident. Basically, Hulkenberg was quite annoyed. He said that was unnecessary because he did nothing wrong there. You know, he was just driving. He was not involved in that. And he passed it by the time he got hit. So, kind of sucks for him. Very expensive for Red Bull. Very, very expensive for Red Bull. And basically, Red Bull, I think the damage was estimated to cost them between 2 and 3 million. And they have admitted, they've openly said, that if they have much more damage costs for the rest of the season, they're going to be forced to either postpone or completely abandon some of the development plans they had for the rest of the year, which of course has made a lot of people online be like, Kevin, now is your time to shine. Let's do this. And Zhou was the only driver behind all of it, so he literally just saw it all happen. He basically had to come to a complete stop because he had no idea where he was meant to drive, and there was debris all over the track. It was a mess. So he had to really kind of just wait for the dust to settle and then see how he can get past that. But of course that did bring out the red flag. And all of the drivers were absolutely fine. They're all completely okay, which just shows you how much of a marvel safety in Formula 1 is now. Like the measures that are put in place for Formula 1 safety now compared to years ago, incredible. That's like, it looked horrific, but the survival cell did its job. The wheel tethers did their job. Like, amazing. And as if that wasn't enough for lap 1, we also had a bit of French terrorism. So Esteban Ocon famously has a problem with Pierre Gasly, it seems. And obviously they are teammates at Alpine. It's the two French drivers at the French team. It should be beautiful. It is not. The Alpine team principal, Bruno Famin, was understandably very angry and said some choice words to the French media while he was on the pit wall in the heat of the moment. And reports and rumours that have been circulating since, it's not looking good for Esti Besti. It's not. After the hairpin, they were at Mirabeau Bass. Esteban decides to start to launch an attack on Pierre. He wants to get past his teammate. And going through Portier, he just completely lunges down the inside of him. There is not space there. Doesn't control the car. Ends up running his rear left tyre over Gasly's front right. Sends him up into the air. Esti Besti's flying for a little bit. That must have hurt his back when he came down. And caused massive damage on his car. Huge damage on his car. And damage on Pierre's car as well. Completely unnecessary. Pierre Gasly was fuming. Understandably so. Bruno Famin, fuming. It's just not very good. You don't send it like that. Especially not on your teammate. Like, the worst thing you can do in terms of crashes in Formula 1 is crash with your teammate. And that's what he did. Unnecessarily. So it was really not very good. And they both managed to get back round to the pits when the red flag was called, which was literally just seconds later. Pierre was literally on his team radio fuming about it when his engineer told him it was a red flag. But Esteban's car was so badly damaged that even though the red flag lasted about 40 minutes to clear up all of the damage from the Perez-Haas incident, obviously those three were all out of the race. There was nothing they could do. They did not get their cars back to the pits under their own steam. Both of the Alpines went back to the garage under their own steam. Esteban's car was finished. They could not fix that in the time that they had. So he was also out of the race. Pierre, they managed to fix his car relatively, but of course he was still carrying a bit of aero damage from that. And Carlos Sainz got back to the pits as well. So he was really saved by the red flag, because that would have been his race over on lap 1. And instead, he managed to finish on the podium, all because of a red flag. So good for him. Basically, that was because, let me tell you why. Let me tell you for why. So when the red flag was called, they didn't have a point that they could go, like a reference point that they could go back to of a line, like a sector line or a safety car line that every single driver had crossed to know the order of the restart. So they had to go back to the qualifying order of the restart, because when the red flag was brought out, not every driver had passed sector 1 yet. They hadn't completed sector 1, so they didn't have an order for the restart. So they've just gone back to the qualifying order, which of course meant that Sainz massively looked out there, massively. And I mean, who knows, because around Monaco, overtaking so difficult anyway, but that could have saved Charles as well, realistically, because it meant that he had Carlos Sainz in his team and he wasn't himself against 2 McLarens. So who knows what could have been? Who knows? But obviously under red flag conditions, the teams are allowed to fix any damage on the car. They get a free choice of changing their tyres if they wanted to, which everyone did. The only driver that was on the same compound, not the same set, the same compound of tyre as they started the race on was Logan Sargent, which meant that he definitely had to pit during the race. No other driver actually had to unless their tyres were dead. So realistically, it kind of killed the race. We had a very dramatic lap 1, and then it meant that we weren't even going to get pit strategies coming into it, really. So, but basically everyone that started the race on the hard tyres had to put the mediums on. Didn't have to, but they did put the mediums on. And everyone that started on the mediums put the hards on, which was very good for them, because of course the hards, much easier to make them last a full, well, now 75 lap race. But the people that had started on the hards, like the Mercedes, very difficult for them. Very, very difficult for them. Lap 3 of the race was the first lap, because obviously lap 2 was their lap back to the grid. So the race restart was on lap 3. That was much, much cleaner. Everyone was in position through to lap 4. The only people that moved at all was Ricciardo had a bad start and lost P12 to Alonso, and Sargent lost P14 to Valtteri Bottas. That's it. Everyone else was in the same order. Ocon received a 10-second penalty for causing a collision with Gasly, which at the time everyone was like, why? He's not even in the race anymore, that's going to have no impact. That was converted for the next race weekend he competes in to a 5-place grid drop. So the stewards have gone very harsh with that, because usually a 10-second penalty is equivalent to a 3-place grid drop, but they've given him a 5-place grid drop for Canada. So they shouldn't have done it, do you know what I mean? It's also worth noting as well that Piastri was carrying damage from the contact with Carlos Sainz on lap 1, and that did impact his handling and his balance. But of course, with it being Monaco, that's not a huge thing for them to have to worry about, because even with a damaged car, it's possible to make your car wide enough that people can't get past you. And then basically, everyone just drove really slowly. Everyone was lapping at like 1 minute 18s, 1 minute 19s, 1 minute 20s, 1 minute 21s. It was very slow, and obviously that's like 10 seconds off of the pace of a qualifying lap. And this was because they were all trying to manage their tyres to get to the end of the race, which kind of killed the atmosphere of the race a little bit. Like, it was a little bit dead. Verstappen on lap 11 said on his team radio that he wasn't entirely sure why Russell was going so slowly, because he was just giving the drivers ahead of him a free pit stop gap, because it got to the point that Russell, trying to manage his tyres, he was on the medium tyres at this point, trying to manage his tyres to be able to nurse them to the end, was driving so slowly that the top 4 were pulling away from him so far that they would be able to pit and still be ahead of him, which obviously isn't ideal. It just kills the race for anyone from George down. There's no chance of them getting onto the podium if there's a whole pit stop ahead of them. On lap 12, Russell then says on his team radio that he's just pootling around, like he's not doing anything, and he obviously wants to go faster. He's told at this stage we gain nothing from going faster, so he's just told carry on doing what you're doing. Lap 13, we see Sauber go out into the pits, so it looks like they're preparing to pit somebody, potentially Valtteri Bottas, and then on lap 16, Bottas does pit. He goes onto the hard tyres from the mediums. He has a 2.5 second stop and comes out in P16 from P14. He then on lap 17 sets the fastest lap of the race so far with a 1:16.561 in clear air on fresh tyres, and then very quickly once he catches up to everyone starts lapping incredibly slowly again because he physically can't go any faster. On lap 14, Lando Norris believed that he was about 5 seconds off the pace, that he was lapping about 5 seconds off the pace, and Leclerc was very much managing his tyres and driving so much slower than the actual pace of the lap, but he was still pulling away from Russell. So he was actually told on his team radio to go slower. He was told stop pulling away from Russell because by doing that, you're allowing the 3 drivers behind you an opportunity to pit and undercut you and get fresh tyres and not lose any positions from it. The gap from Norris to Russell at this point was 8.5 seconds, and then Leclerc to Norris was 3 seconds. So the top 4 were very close in a little bunch, and then there was just this big gap back to Russell. On lap 18, Carlos Sainz warns on his team radio that Piastri is getting quite close to Charles. He said, I'm guessing that Charles managing the tyres because Piastri was quite close there. One lap he might send it. He might just try and get past. Because at this point, Leclerc is setting consistently low 1 minute 20s and mid to high 1 minute 19s while managing the pack and his tyres, and that was kind of the theme of the entire race. On lap 20, Albon was driving within Tsunoda's DRS range, still about 3 seconds off of the pace with his lap times though, despite being right on his tail. By lap 21, Norris's gap back to Russell was now between 11 and 12 seconds, which is a safety car pit window in Monaco. So if a safety car was to be brought out for any reason, Norris would be able to pit under the safety car and not lose a position to Russell at that point, which of course means that the 3 drivers ahead of him also have that window. By lap 23, Leclerc starts to pick up the pace a little bit, laps in the 1:18s, as are Piastri, Sainz and Norris, but they aren't stuck to the back of him anymore. There's now 5 seconds between Leclerc and Norris, so they've spread out a tiny bit. The front 4 are still miles ahead of the rest of the field though, and I really don't know why everyone went so slow. It was such a procession. It ended up that at the very end of the race, multiple drivers were 2 laps down purely because everyone had to lap so slowly. But the front 4, even though they were going slow, still managed to lap people twice. It was a strange one. On lap 29, Lando Norris complained of a bit of abrasion on his front left tyre. He was told that it's the same as they saw on Ferrari's front left tyres 10 laps ago, so it's not something to worry about. And then on lap 30, he's told that they're starting to see the signs of graining on Sainz's front left tyre and just abrasion on his. So again, his tyres are in much better condition than the Ferraris. On lap 30 as well, Stroll is struggling with graining on his front left, on his mediums. And also on lap 30, Norris gets super close to the wall with his left rear at Saint-Devote. That's because they're driving so slowly that his tyres are just getting cold. So the car's sliding about because they don't have the grip because the tyres are cold. On lap 32, Alonso is being chased. He's being hounded. Relatively low speed chase, but still. He's being chased by Ricciardo, Sargent, Zhou and Bottas in P12, and he is 7 seconds behind Lance Stroll. He's basically backing them up to give Stroll enough room to pit and not lose any positions. On lap 33, Carlos Sainz starts strategy thinking, and he says on his radio that he thinks that Lando could be quite dangerous towards the end. It's also worth noting at this point as well, if Sainz was to change tyres, he doesn't. If he was to change tyres though, at this point, he only had hards and softs as an option for a tyre change because he ruined the mediums when he had the puncture on lap 1. He doesn't have any mediums that he could put on, so that of course does limit his options. On lap 39, Leclerc is told to go even slower. He's told, if you can, we need to slow down a bit. He's like, what's the scope of that? All right, Charles, get your words out. He's like, what's the scope of that? He's told, we're stopping McLaren having a pit window, and he basically just said, I don't want to do that. He's like, that just makes me push in the slow speed. I don't like it. Don't want to do it. By lap 42, the top 4 lap Zhou. They are also around lap 42, lapping Sargent, Ricciardo and Alonso. And then on lap 43, Stroll pits, has a 2.3 second stop, goes from P11, coming out, still in P11. because of Alonso doing his job properly. He goes onto the hard tyres between Sainz and Norris, lapping him. He goes onto the hard tyres and comes out between Sainz and Norris, who are lapping him. He's still 2 seconds ahead of Alonso in P12 and 17 seconds behind Gasly in P10. On lap 47, Leclerc asks his team if they want to know the margins. He's thinking about what to do, you know? This man is using his brain. And his race engineer, Brian Bossi, just goes, no, we aren't interested, we know them. He's like, oh, right, okay, that's rude. And just having a bit of a banter, because what else are they going to do? Not like they're driving for their lives or anything, they're just pootling around. So on lap 50, Stroll gets a puncture on his new set of tyres, and the tyre flies off of his left rear wheel as he turns into the pit lane. No safety car or yellow flag or anything is brought out because it's contained within the pit lane. He has a 5.3 second stop onto a set of soft tyres and comes out in P16, 15 seconds behind Bottas in P15. Basically what he done was at the swim pool chicane, he just hit the tyre and it gave it a puncture and came off the wheel. The gap between Hamilton in P7 and Tsunoda in P8 at this point is 45 seconds. What happened there, Yuki? No one knows. He was just going slowly. At this point, Hamilton has passed the back markers up to Logan Sargent. So we've got the front 4 off in their own little bubble. Then we've got 3 of Russell, Verstappen and Hamilton. Then we've got a massive gap. Then we've got the rest of the field, pretty much. And they're not in that order anymore because they're all lapping each other weirdly. And it's just, it was a strange one, it really was. On lap 52, Hamilton very much has a free pit stop. He has a 2.5 second stop onto the hard tyres from P7 to P7. He comes out 22 seconds ahead of Tsunoda, and he is not told that his outlap is critical in order to be able to get past Verstappen. So he does his usual sort of outlap in terms of bringing the tyres in slowly, especially with the hard tyres. Verstappen then on lap 53 pits onto hard tyres that he started the race on, because they've only done like 1 lap. Same as Hamilton, he also did that. Comes out in P6 ahead of Hamilton, 2.5 seconds ahead, retaining his position. Hamilton then says on his team radio, why didn't you tell me that the outlap's critical? Like, I would have pushed if I'd known that that's what I needed to do. On lap 54, Bottas overtakes Logan Sargent. An overtake? No way. He passes him for P13. On lap 56, Hamilton and Verstappen are both lapping in the 1 minute 15s, the high 1 minute 15s, but still the 1 minute 15s, while Leclerc is lapping mid 117s. On lap 57, Stroll passes Ocon through the tunnel, very bold move. On lap 59, Sainz, again, is thinking about strategy and thinking about Lando, and he's like, if Lando puts on a new medium, then Charles is in danger. Not just me, we're all in danger. Doesn't happen, none of the top 4 pit. Also on that lap, Sargent pits going on to the medium tyres and comes out in P16, and Hamilton sets a time of 1 minute 14.204. Lap 60, Verstappen gets a little bit annoyed on his team radio, says that nobody is watching his battery again, which was a problem he had at Imola as well, that he was running with very low states of charge. On lap 61, the pit window for Norris back to Russell seems to have closed. He's missed his opportunity. If he was going to pit, the rest of the top 4 has also missed their opportunity, really. It's back down to 17 seconds, which isn't long enough for green track conditions. If there was at any point a safety car, then yeah, they could still have a free pit stop. But with normal race conditions, that window is gone for them. Verstappen is also chasing Russell down now with much better traction and grip, and is within DRS range on him, which of course is making Russell go faster and then closing this gap up to the top 4. So Verstappen's pit stop, basically, Verstappen and Hamilton injected a bit of life back into the race with their pit stops, because obviously there was no consequences for them doing that. They stayed in the exact same positions, but it meant that they could push things a bit more and have a tyre advantage over Russell and force him forwards, which then impacts the top 4 because they don't have a free pit stop anymore. On lap 63, Hamilton sets a 1 minute 14.165, which is the fastest lap of the race, so he does get an extra point for that at the end of the race. On lap 64, he in P7 laps Tsunoda, drawing Tsunoda and Albon's battle for P8. On lap 65, Leclerc is once again starting to come up on the back of Zhou and Sargent. They're having a little battle down in P15 and 16. I say battle, it's around Monaco, it's not really a battle, but they were having a little play fight for P15 and 16. Leclerc is going to come and lap them again, so there'll be 2 laps down. Lap 66, Tsunoda is told, we have a margin on strategy, so you can push now. And he's like, that's what I like to hear. I want to be pushing. Lap 67, Sargent says that he hit the wall. Basically what happened is Zhou and Sargent both hit it right after each other. Both of them carried on with no stopping or slowing or anything. It didn't do anything to spice anything up, but they both didn't take a very good line and hit the wall ever so slightly. On lap 68, Verstappen is told to call his brakes for 2 laps. On lap 69, Leclerc clears Zhou and Sargent into free air and starts to pull away from Piastri while he then gets through them. He builds a 4.6 second gap back to Piastri. Sainz is then 1 second behind Piastri and Norris is another 1.5 seconds behind Sainz. On lap 70, Sargent passes Zhou for P15 using Piastri lapping him to get through. Very, very clever. And he massively pulls away from Zhou. On lap 73, Zhou is now 14 seconds behind Sargent in 3 laps. He then pits onto the soft tyres, comes out 35 seconds behind Sargent in P16 and is lapped by Tsunoda and Albon. He's clearly here trying to get a fastest lap, even though he wouldn't get a point for that. He doesn't get the fastest lap off of Lewis Hamilton. On lap 74, Leclerc says on his team radio that he'll just bring it home. Brian Bossy's like, thank you. And then on lap 78, Leclerc is 8.6 seconds ahead of Piastri, who is 0.4 seconds ahead of Sainz, who is 0.4 seconds ahead of Norris. And then by the time they cross the line, Leclerc won the Monaco Grand Prix, making him the first Monegasque driver to ever win the Monaco Grand Prix in a Formula One World Championship. That's his first win of the season, his first home race win, and he also won Driver of the Day with 32% of the vote. It's also his first podium at home within Formula One or Formula 2. He'd never finished on the podium at home, so it was a very historic day for him. His race time was 2 hours and 23 minutes and 15.554 seconds. Piastri crossed the line 7.154 seconds off. Sainz was P3, completing the podium 7.585 seconds off. Lando Norris was 8.65 seconds off by the time he crossed the line, so he pulled back from Sainz a little bit. And then we had Russell P5, Verstappen P6, Hamilton P7 with the fastest lap, as I said, so an extra point there. And with that fastest lap, that was his 54th fastest lap with Mercedes, which beats Schumacher's record of the most fastest laps with the same team. Schumacher had 53 with Ferrari, so they had been equal with that. Now Lewis holds that record by himself. Then we had Tsunoda in P8 a lap down, Albon P9, which was his first point scoring of the season, Gasly P10 also a lap down. Again, first point of the season for Gasly. Then Alonso P11, 2 laps down, Ricciardo P12, Bottas P13, Stroll P14, Sargent P15, Zhou P16, and then Ocon DNF, Hulkenberg DNF, Perez DNF, Magnussen DNF. As I mentioned earlier, that is the first time in Formula One history that the top 10 finished in the same positions that they started the race. And the championship battle is massively spicing up. I personally, don't come for me, I genuinely believe this, think that we could be in for a McLaren-Ferrari battle for both the drivers and the Constructors' Championships. I don't think Red Bull are going to be involved by the second half of the season. Genuinely. Call me delusional. If things carry on the way they're going, we're getting a McLaren-Ferrari battle. And I love that. Verstappen is now on 169 points in the Drivers' Championship, with Leclerc 31 points behind in P2. Lando Norris is 25 points behind Leclerc in P3. Sainz is P4. Perez is P5. Piastri is then 36 points behind Perez in P6. So Sainz and Perez are very close. Perez is only 1 point behind Sainz, and Sainz is 5 points behind Norris, and then there is a bit of a gap back to everyone else then. The only drivers who still are yet to score any points are Zhou, Bottas and Sargent. Then for the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull are still in the lead at the moment with 276, but Ferrari are only 24 points behind them. McLaren are 68 points behind Ferrari, Mercedes another 88 points back, and the only team yet to score any points is Sauber. So that is everything that I was going to say from the Monaco Grand Prix. As I said, the race itself wasn't hugely interesting, although it was a historic weekend and very exciting. The race itself was kind of the least interesting part, but it's Monaco, that's what happens. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please do let me know. Like, rate, comment, subscribe. Come and join me over on the Pitboards and Podiums TikTok. I would love to see you over there. We have actually just surpassed 1,000 followers on there, which is very exciting. So if you would like to come and join the little community that I'm creating, please do. I will see you very, very soon. Obviously, we've got the Canadian Grand Prix coming up, so I'll be doing a track guide for that. And yeah, I'll see you very, very soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you then. Bye!